Hi students, I wanted to do a quick tutorial on the different kinds of mediums that you can try when you're using the new technique of Impressionistic painting. Remember, Impressionism is when you have short little brush strokes and you fill those colors in with other colors to make an impression of something. So it doesn't look exactly like what it is. So I'm going to show you how to do that with different materials. The first thing we're going to use are watercolors. These are the watercolors we use at school. They're pretty easy to find and very inexpensive. We have a cup of water and a simple paintbrush. So my watercolor section is here. I'm going to mix my paints over in this part of my watercolor section and start off with some green. So as we know, we're going to take some yellow, put some yellow down, and we know that yellow and blue make green. So I'm going to add a little blue to that. And now we have made a light green. So when I do use my paintbrush, I'm just going to slide my paintbrush across my paper. And this paper is a simple multi-medium paper surface. So it can take lots of different kinds of mediums. Now I'm going to make this green darker by adding more blue to it, so we have a different value of green. So I'm going to fill those empty spots with some of the darker green. Maybe we're making the leaves of a tree or some lily pads or anything really that you would like. Now I'm going to let that dry before I fill anything else in, because the watercolors will blend together if you don't let it dry. Now I'm going to use a different tool with the watercolors. Instead of a paintbrush, I'm going to use a Q-tip. And dip the Q-tip in the water, use the same green that I made, and this time I'm going to just dot my paper. This is called pointillism, and Seurat was a pointillist artist, and he was an Impressionist painter too. So we are going to practice some pointillism. And you'll see how it looks different than the paintbrush. Then what we're going to do is we can make this green even darker. So I'm going to turn my Q-tip on the other side and push it in between the green that I've already put on there. Watercolor does dry pretty fast. So now we can go back to the first watercolors we used with brush. And now I'm going to look at my color wheel and say, well, what color might look good with green? Well, the colors next to green are called analogous colors, so they would look good. And the colors across from green, like the red, would look good. Those are complementary colors. So I'm going to use maybe some yellow right now, some bright yellow, and see how that works. So I'm going to take my paintbrush, get the yellow, and then in between this green, I'm just going to find some spots that I want to put some yellow in. Not covering up too much what I already did. Okay. I can take a new Q-tip and I can put some yellow dots for my pointillism in between here. I could do this fairly quickly. You might want to take your time more. Now I'm going to choose a color that maybe would be across and complement my greens and yellows. So I'm going to pick a value of red, which is pink, magenta. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to make some tiny strokes right in between. And maybe these are the flowers on top of the lily pads. But I just want to show you the small strokes and how they look together. And once it's dry, then you can even add them on top of some of the greens and yellows and see how they react. And then I'm going to pick some pink, magenta to go in between my yellow and my greens. And you can add whatever colors you want. If you put the colors together and it's too wet, then it's going to turn brownish, and we don't want that. So as you can see, here are the two different styles we're using watercolor with the points from the Q-tips and the paintbrush. So now we're going to go to another form of paint, which is called an acrylic paint. An acrylic paint can come in a tube, and it does not need water. You can put water on it if you want to, and I've squirted out some acrylic paints onto my little paper palette. I'm going to use the same paintbrush, and I'm going to use the same colors pretty much. So I am going to dip my paintbrush in a green, and I'm going to, in short brush strokes, move my paintbrush around. Looks like leaves, the light hitting it. Now I'm going to take a darker value of green, and these don't blend so easily together because there's not as much water with them, so they're a little more vibrant. They dry very fast, acrylics, and they stand out more. You can see how bright they are compared to some of the watercolor. Then I'm going to add some yellow in between, and it might mix a little bit with the green. It's okay. You can see those touch of yellows coming in. Monet didn't mind mixing the paints right onto his canvas. I'm going to get some of this darker yellow. It's almost a brownish yellow, like an ochre color. And put that in there. Now I can also add maybe a little bit of red, which is my complementary color. Add that on top, put that in between. However you would like. You start to see this looks very interesting when you start adding complementary colors too. Okay, so there's the acrylic versus the watercolor. Now we're going to use oil pastels. Oil pastels are not paints. They're oils with a coloring in them. So I'm going to pick some greens. And the tricky thing about oil pastels is that they do not dry. So when I use an oil pastel, they can smear. And I'm just going to use big strokes like I would as if I was painting, but it goes on so smoothly because of the oil. I can choose a different value of green. See how that one's darker, and I'm just going to find some spots in between. So if some of you at home don't have paints, but you have oil pastels, they work really well for things like this, for impressionistic paintings. And we'll add some yellows. I broke, that's okay. Yellows in between. However you want to do that. We can even put a different shade of yellow, a different value in there. If this was grass, it would make things look like it's almost waving instead of just sitting there. And then if we want to put some oranges in there, we can do that. Now the interesting thing about oils, pastels, is that you can smear them. So if you wanted to take your finger and blend them and smear them, it would look more kind of like one of Monet's oil paintings. So that's the fun thing about oils, pastels, is you can smear them with your fingers. So your fingers are a very important tool in making art. So I'm going to show you the oil pastels. Now remember, they don't dry, so they will smudge if you touch them. The last thing I'm going to show you is what Monet used, which was oil paints. But oil paints can be very messy and very expensive, so I bought these oil paint sticks, which are interesting. Now the difference between the oil paint sticks and the oil pastels is oil paints will dry fully. You can touch it afterwards and it won't smear. So I'm going to take a light green and I'm going to use it just like I would an oil pastel, and I'm just going to do my little lines. Maybe take a darker green. It's so easy compared to with paintbrushes and everything with oils. You can just draw it right on there. And then maybe I want to add some oranges in between. And I don't have many other colors, so I'm going to add the only color I have, purple in there, and that makes things interesting too. Let's see, this is like a magenta. Now you can try to smear those, but I wouldn't probably smear it. But these are the different types of mediums that you could use at home if you have them, or if you want to order them online, it's up to you too. But use whatever you have at home. That's what I do. I try to use everything that I have at home and experiment with them, because that's what art is experimenting. So have fun with your Monet project and show me on my Google slideshow what you can create. Bye, kids.